Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan, and it's not Spawn Year. It's day 23 of my comic review video day calendar, and I'm still reviewing comics every day from my personal collection. And this time, I grabbed one from a series that I own very little of. I bought some Avengers in the early to mid 2010s when I was reviewing current, but not very much before that, and this is probably the only Silver Age Avengers comic I own. This is Avengers number 21 by Stan Lee and Don Heck, of course, and I don't even remember purchasing this. I probably bought this either at a vintage stock or I got it in a collection and just hung on to it because it was old. A lot of the issues of disparate series that I don't actively collect, I end up having because either they were notable to me for some reason, there was some kind of really cool cover, or they were just really early in a run, or it was a surprisingly good deal for a thing, and so this is not a thing that I had to have. I didn't buy it for, or didn't hang on to it for any reason other than it's cool to have books from this period represented because you don't run across them all the time, at least in such a way where they're buyable. And if I did buy this at a shop, I probably didn't spend more than $8 or $10 on it, and honestly, that's probably all it's worth, because this particular copy looks like it's kind of falling apart. I didn't even take this out of the sleeve to review it, to read it. I just read this in digital, because the cover here looks mostly intact, but you maybe going to fall apart if I even look at it wrong. So I didn't want to risk taking this out, but I have it. Here it is. Someday it might just come to dust because I thought about it and then it disintegrated, but I've got it, so that's cool. Anyway, once again, 1967. I have not read, I don't think, really any issues of Avengers that go back this far, and so this is not my forte. This is not my expertise. And I had kind of forgotten even that the Avengers in this issue weren't founding members, weren't there from the beginning, that there is a changeover that happens just a few issues before this, in issue 17, and this is the second group of Avengers that are having a difficult time getting along. It's a very dysfunctional sort of family. And I want to show you this real quick. As you see there, with a cover that is not falling apart in the digital scan, next to the 12-cent price tag, it says Pop Art Productions, and that's ripped off on mine, so I never knew what that said. It looked like Pop something. It's Pop Art Productions. I don't know why it says that under Marvel, but there it is. So right away, you get the idea that things are not going to work out for the Avengers in this issue. It kind of spells that out and spoils it for you right on the cover. The Bitter Taste of Defeat is the name of this story, and if that weren't enough, it, on the very first page, in a text box, lets you know that the Avengers are not going to win this issue. And I'm like, oh, you kind of gave everything away. I'm not really going to be surprised when I get to the end of this and our heroes have not won the day. I mean, spoiler alert, they're going to eventually, right? Because, like, they're the Avengers, and this book keeps going. I hate to spoil that for anybody, but of course, they're going to be okay at the end of the day. But that's kind of the novelty of this issue, and it's Stan Lee constantly trying to elevate this material, turn things on its head, do things you won't expect, be a little bit more character-driven than your average Golden Age comic was. Try to be a little bit more like a novel, but not take yourself too seriously. That's why there's so many exclamation points. That's why it's so wordy. That's why Stan Lee is constantly making fun of himself, and sometimes to their chagrin, the other people that are working on these books through it. That's why there's so much, I don't want to say fourth wall breaking, but so much like editorializing and interjecting from the peanut gallery, from the people that are writing and working on the book. Uh, but bitter taste of defeat is maybe enough to tell you what's going to happen, sort of. But you get to the middle of this text box and it says, but now they're about to experience their first disaster. So the Avengers have always won the day at the end, even if they're argumentative and bickering and fighting amongst themselves, but that's going to be their downfall here. Teamwork is not really happening. The Power Rangers, they are not. Maybe that's because there's only 4 of them, and there should be at least 5 or 6 in a superhero team. That's how many there were in the original team. Was it Iron Man, Thor, Wasp, Ant-Man, and Hulk? So 5. And instead of a kind of 6 Ranger, you end up with that whole team leaving, and they are replaced with the Quicksilver and Hawkeye and Captain America and Scarlet Witch. And let me finish reading this text box, and then I'll get back into that. But what effect will defeat have upon those who have never known aught but victory? Well, I guess you'll have to tune in next time to find out, because it's going to end on a cliffhanger, and we're going to, I guess, bookend with this idea, because we're not going to explore what they do when they lose. We're just going to see them lose. So the idea is the Avengers have to deal with their reputation being tarnished here and being framed not for being villains or anything, but for being not very good at their jobs. They're going to be framed by the Enchantress and by a new villain named Power Man, who is not Luke Cage. There was a Power Man before Luke Cage, which I had forgotten about. So I guess this is his first appearance. I haven't looked this up to see what it would book if I had a decent copy, but I'm sure this is not an invaluable comic. It's probably worth a couple $100. This one is not, but if you had one in, very good to fine shape, you're not going to find one of these in near mint condition, of course. But anyway, I digress. But the idea is Enchantress and this new villain that she creates, Power Man, out of just some guy named Eric, they end up framing the Avengers for being incompetent, for being dunderheads, and for taking the law into their own hands when they don't have all the information and they don't know what they're doing. And the Avengers just look like idiots in this comic because Hawkeye and Captain America are constantly at each other's throats. Hawkeye is obsessed with the idea that he should be leading the team and that Captain America is ill-equipped because he's old and because he thinks he knows everything. And Hawkeye is really, as Scarlet Witch says, just jealous of his position, and he thinks that he would be better to lead the team, or maybe it's just because he wants the fame and the glory that goes along with that, and he's extremely arrogant, and all of these personalities are very over the top. I got a little bit sick of the constant bickering between these two characters, and it's fun. I feel like it's Stan Lee getting a little bit self-indulgent with just having a lot of fun giving all of these quips and I guess I can't say banter, but all these arguments to these characters. Scarlet Witch is, as you had often in early Marvel, a very typical female superhero where she is kind of just there to look pretty and for the men to gawk over. But this time we have a character, well, I guess you have this with Jean Grey too. I guess Stan Lee is constantly offsetting the very typical nature of his female characters because they're mostly just eye candy, and he'll even say in the letters pages, like there's a letter in the letters pages where somebody wants him to get rid of Scarlet Witch because she's not interesting and also kind of just a plot device. This guy feels like because she has her hex power and she's able to just be kind of a Deus Ex Machina. Anytime Stan Lee needs a fight to end, she could just go, hex power, and that's it. It's done. And so this guy's like, why don't you just get rid of her? she's not that interesting. Bring back Wonder Man or something. And this issue is a little bit about Wonder Man, because the way that Power Man becomes Power Man is the same way Wonder Man gets his powers. But Stan Lee comes back with, well, I love beauties, and so she's gonna stay. So I guess he offsets that by having these characters be obscenely powerful. And so she tries to step in between Hawkeye and Captain America and says, hey, we need to figure out how to work as a team. And oh, by the way, I think my brother should lead the team. Quicksilver should. Not me. I'm not thinking about myself. It's just, well, it's got to be a man, right? Like, it's, it's the time that it is. And there's going to be some kind of guy that's going to lead this team. And I think that should be my brother. And that's pretty much what she does in this issue, besides using her hex powers in fights that are set up, that are by design there to mess up the Avengers' reputation. So, like I said, you've got this random army guy who, or I guess he's a scientist, who, he's wearing a uniform when we first see him, and he stumbles upon the old Baron Zemo laboratory, and he's like, oh, this is where Wonder Man was created. And so Enchantress ends up using Zemo's technology and gives him powers, and then he basically, because she's beautiful, or maybe she's got a spell on him, I can't tell. She's been kicked out of Asgard, so she's basically just messing around, and I guess she hates the Avengers, and they probably defeated her in some battle that I didn't read. I don't know. And anyway, he says that he'll believe anything she wants him to. At one point, he says, I believe in Santa Claus now, in order to illustrate that whatever she tells him to believe, he will, because she's given him these powers, and also she's mega pretty, and so he's going to do whatever she wants. Very quickly, that relationship starts to deteriorate, though, because he doesn't like that she's not giving him enough to do in these battles, and eventually she'll set him up so that, and like, neither of these characters, of course, is loyal to the other. There's no honor among thieves, and he's kind of waiting for, so he says that to her. I guess he must not be under a spell, because he doesn't really mean it. I forgot about that. There's a place where there's a thought balloon, because we're in this period where we get into pretty much everybody's heads at some point with thought balloons, which, by the way, I used to be kind of hardline against, at least doing in modern comics, and I've kind of softened on it in recent years, but I'm kind of in a place now where I'm not totally sure how I feel about the thought balloon thing, where I guess I always kind of wanted the medium to be a little bit closer to novels and a little bit less like movies, in that you stay in one person's head. I hesitate with the movie thing, because I guess in some ways you're not in anybody's head, in that you're, unless there's voiceover, you're not going to hear internal monologue. But I just mean that typically in prose, you're only going to be in one person's head at once, because it's really jarring to jump around a lot. And when you're reading a comic, it's somewhere in between prose and film. So it still sometimes seems a little bit jarring to me to get into everybody's heads, but I guess less so, because you're not getting one voice of a character taking you through everything like you are in prose. And so I feel a little bit better about it than I once did. But of course, this is the conventions of this time. So obviously, even if I was against that in current comics, I wouldn't lob any criticisms about it here. That's how it was done at the time. I can talk about why it may or may not be as effective a way of doing it, and why we got away from that convention, certainly. And this stuff, like I said, is certainly bogged down with words. There is a lot of explaining things that you can see very readily on a panel, but I think a lot of that is just Stan Lee trying to get as much of himself in the book as possible, which I guess I bring up every time I review a Stan Lee comic. But anyway, I digress. So it feels a little bit like a cartoon, in that we get example after example of the Enchantress throwing something at the Avengers, they're not knowing that she's behind it. They never know she's behind it, by the way, in this issue. By the end of this, they've fought Power Man, but they don't know where he came from, and she's in the background. And they get several different situations that kind of like I said, an old cartoon, are messing with them, and they've got to lick their wounds at the end, and they keep, trying again and failing. And like I said, they just look kind of stupid by the end of this, where they fight this big monster guy who turns out to not really be there. So he's some kind of a manifestation that's just in their heads, that like a collective hallucination or something that Enchantress has given them. And the cops show up and are like, "Hey, what were you doing? You've caused all this property damage," but there was nothing there. And so, we don't have stalwart heroes here who can do no wrong, and we have this, just like with Spider-Man, really, this constant flux of popular opinion, where if the Avengers, and Stan Lee has a really good sense of continuity here, if the Avengers mess up, the public takes note of that and wonders if they're causing more problems than they're solving, and hold them accountable, and the authorities hold them accountable when they make mistakes, and they're not above the law. And I like that we're constantly checking in with the PR of all of this. Also, really good sense of continuity, by the way, just in keeping track of it, is these books were always so good at. When the last time was we saw Enchantress and Wonder Man, and how long all of that has been, and how new this new team is, and that they haven't gone up against these characters before. And so, like I said, you've just got situation after situation. And when they fight Power Man, the cops are led to believe that Power Man is actually a hero, and that Captain America attacks him without any real provocation. And so by the end of this, the Avengers are arrested, or about to be arrested, which is kind of a fun situation and would be really novel at that time, because they just keep taking the law into their own hands, and wrecking things, and ostensibly attacking people they're not supposed to be attacking. Of course, Power Man really is a bad guy, and the Avengers really are within their purview, more or less, but Enchantress and Power Man have set everything up to look like that is not the case. And so this is a fun one. I'll at some point have to read the next issue and see what actually happens with this. I was kind of surprised that it goes over into the next issue like this, especially with that opening that made it seem like what we were going to explore was the Avengers licking their wounds, and that is indeed not what happens. But anyway, that is Avengers number 21, and I will cover another comic for you tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching these, really appreciate it. And if you've looked at this before, and if you're familiar with early Avengers, feel free to add anything that I didn't talk about in the comments. And once again, I was Captain Logan. Happy reading.